In the 1940s, a man by the name of Adolf Hitler orchestrated a genocide of Jews, known as the Holocaust. The motive behind this tragedy was to slaughter millions of people who fit a distinct description, all because Hitler believed these people to be inferior. The mentality that Hitler and his equivalents are above Jews is a form of elitism. Now, you all may wonder, how does this tragedy relate to your life? Well, we live in a society that puts emphasis on minorities and inferiority, and that in itself is an example of elitism. According to a text entitled Democratic Elitism, Conflict and Consensus, it essentially talks about how elitism stems from political administration and trickles down into smaller avenues. America's administration deems us to be a democracy, but in actuality, they don't listen to the voice of the people. Moreover, a documentary entitled Make America Hate Again, which talks about Donald Trump's administration, states that supremacists have this narcissistic, my apologies, mentality, and that is a detriment to society because they only consider what they think is right for the country and not considering what the people believe that they need. So, people that don't fit into the standards of these elite groups are put at a social disadvantage. So I'm here to talk to you all today about the avenues that elitism affects, which would be the workplace and education. First, we're going to talk about how elitism affects the workplace and education. We're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about the benefit of the solution and what we can actually do to make a change. So elitism impacts education in the workplace more than we may think. According to an article entitled Elites at Work, it talks about this false accusation that white people who are privileged are more ambitious than black people. This idea is impacted by this ideology of elitism. And if we perpetuate this idea, then it will hinder those from personal growth, more particularly the underprivileged people. Now that we've briefly considered how elitism affects the workplace, we're going to transition over into how elitism affects education. So naturally, people encounter stipulations with education, but with this idea of elitism, these stipulations are more extreme. The idea of elitism hinders students from obtaining a higher education, and it also presents unequal educational opportunities. For example, in an article that talks about the Trump administration effect, it talks about how the Trump administration has the power to do positive for education, but instead they've hindered education by passing this executive order, which is banning Muslims from being at higher education institutions. Moreover, they passed an executive order for that bans people from going in and out of the country, and that whole action is hindering people from obtaining higher education, more specifically the Muslims. In another article entitled Smug Education, it talks about a student who has an Ivy League education, and he mentions that his Ivy League education taught him that people who have an Ivy League education are above those who don't have an Ivy League education, and that those people are beneath them. If we consider this idea of an Ivy League education being superior to those who don't obtain an Ivy League education, again, this is another form of elitism, and if it persists, it will create greater issues. Now that we've discussed the problem, which is how elitism affects education in the workplace, we're going to talk about solutions. So in order to solve this issue, you first have to have an active voice. Nothing gets done when you're quiet. According to this short TED Talk video, the speaker, Michael Kimmel, talks about gender equality, but the gist of his entire video is that people who are privileged, privilege is invisible to people who have it. So in other words, people who are privileged don't see or understand the struggles that people who are underprivileged go through. They are in this bubble. And so in order for us to solve that, it's hard for underprivileged people to get overprivileged people to understand our struggles because, it's like talking to a wall. But what we can do is speak out, right? And that can get supremacists or people who are privileged, that will get their attention. Okay, and the benefits of speaking out. So one, in speaking out, you have to do it within a community with unity. One voice alone will not be enough. But if we speak out and people hear our voice and hear our wishes and our demands, it will create better opportunities in the workplace and in education. So let's go back to my Holocaust example, which kind of seemed a little extreme. Despite the severity of what the Holocaust did to people, the overarching idea is that there's a superior and there's an inferior, and social issues come about. So considering the elitism that is current in our society today, we have to, combat this ideology that a group of people are superior to those who are inferior, and it will diminish social justice issues. So this right here is a picture of people boycotting. Basically, as you saw on the other slide before this, it talked about boycotting or neglecting legislation. So basically, if we don't abide by the legislation that they pass and we protest, then they're likely to compromise or hear our voice and understand where we're coming from. So we talked about the issue, elitism, and its negative impacts on education and workplace. We've looked at the solution and we've considered the benefits, and now it's time to take action, and in that, you have to have an active voice. Talk back.